First thing to say is congratulations to McLaren Mercedes for the job they've done this year, the way they've transformed that car and the competitive tone of the team. Just brilliant. Two very, very good racing drivers as well. And as we go towards the end of the 2024 Formula One World Championship, they're leading the Constructors' Championship. Again, congratulations. And second, Lando Norris still in the running mathematically against Max Verstappen, preventing Max possibly of winning his fourth consecutive world title. But post the US Grand Prix in Austin and going in, of course, to this weekend's Mexican Grand Prix, I thought it might be appropriate to have a look at how many points since the famous Hungarian Grand Prix McLaren have been, well, let's be charitable about it, been playing around with. Because there's a lot of talk about doing the best for the championship, having two very, very fast drivers is best for the Constructors' Championship, and also that Lando Norris did the right thing in Hungary because the team would then be behind him, maximum effort going towards the Drivers' World Championship this year. So let's have a look at those races since Hungary. I've excluded, of course, the Dutch Grand Prix and the Singapore Grand Prix, where Lando won easily and extremely well both races. So fair enough, great result. But let's have a look at the Hungarian, Belgian, Italian, Azerbaijan and US Grand Prix in Austin from the perspective of Lando Norris and the team, and Lando Norris and his teammate Oscar Piastri. So here's the first graphic, and I've got the 5 races there, the key races, which may well define the results of the 2024 World Championship. The actual result, there you can see Hungary. We know Lando gave the win to Oscar. He slowed down on track, gave the win to Oscar according to and falling in politely with team orders to do so. So he's P2 in Hungary. Belgium, he finished 5th, a difficult race in Belgium. Well, ran wide at the first corner, La Source, and then basically spent the rest of the race playing catch up through the traffic, finished only 5th on a day when Oscar Piastri actually could have won the race had he not overshot his pit stop and finished P2. Italian Grand Prix at Monza, he was on the pole. He led cleanly out of the first chicane, was taken completely by surprise by Oscar Piastri going into the second chicane, with Oscar passing him on the outside and Lando having to give him room, as a result of which he then got passed by Charles Leclerc as well. So that was a disastrous race for Lando in terms of where he could have been, so he finished P3 there. Azerbaijan, Baku, very, very good drive by Lando to set fastest lap and finish 4th. But why did he only finish 4th when Oscar Piastri won that race? Well, he finished 4th because he qualified badly. And he qualified badly because at the end of Q1, right at the end of Q1 on his last lap, he got a yellow from Esteban Ocon going very slowly on track and came out of the throttle. He got a lot of criticism from, I don't know whom, but he got a lot of criticism, I can't understand why, for backing off and for obeying the yellows. He had to do it in my view, and he did exactly the right thing. And then, of course, he was spending catch-up in that race as well. And then finally we get to the US Grand Prix in Austin, where he finished 4th, having been 3rd on the road as they went under the checkered flag, but then getting a penalty. Now let's have a look at those results in a little bit more detail, going back to Hungary. I said at the time that I didn't think Lando should have followed team orders, and I think he should have stayed in first place. But I also said, to qualify that I think McLaren were completely wrong, management-wise, to obviously decide in some sort of pre-race briefing that if one of the two drivers had to come in to cover one of their opposition and as a result got out of position relative to the teammate, in other words, if they were lying second, came in to do a cover and came out as a result of all that in P1, they would give that position back. I said at the time, and I still stand by that there are so many variables there and there are so many things that can go wrong in and out of the pit stop, let alone on the in and out laps, that to start saying if you're coming in early to cover, say, a Ferrari or a Mercedes or a Red Bull, you then have to give the position back several laps later, I think was a huge ask. And I cannot imagine, A, why the management thought of that, and B, why the drivers went along with it. Because it's one thing to be running on track together. One of them's on newer tyres, one is on older tyres, different strategy, whatever it is. And maybe you allow one driver to go ahead to see if he can do something about the car in front. And if he can't, you give the position back. But if you start bringing pit stops into it as well, there's so many different variables there that to me, it just doesn't fall under the heading of something you can control from the pit wall. And I think Lando felt the same way, because when he was given the instructions from the pit wall, he questioned them and said, well, tell him to catch up to me and things like that. And then came this plead over the radio, Lando, if you want the team behind you going into the rest of the year, do this, it's the right thing to do, blah, blah, blah. And so he did, because Lando's that sort of guy. I can think of not a million, but I can think of at least 5 racing drivers that I've known personally who wouldn't have done that. And I think that's correct. I don't think they should have done that. I don't think he should have done that. I think he should have won that race. So I'm going to give him a P1 there for the Hungarian Grand Prix. And I think that's where I think McLaren made a big mistake there doing that, because it then upset the momentum for Lando Norris going into the Belgian Grand Prix, where going into the first corner, he was on the outside of Oscar Piastri, but right alongside him. He'd made a really good start. And Oscar's on the inside, therefore, going into La Source. Runs a little bit wide. So what does Lando do? He runs wide as well to avoid Oscar and avoid any sort of contact. And that basically messed up his race. And why did he do that? Let's look again at this picture of the start of the Hungarian Grand Prix. It's because on the first corner of the first lap, Oscar Piastri came down the inside and basically ran wide going into the corner, pretty much as Max Verstappen did on the opening lap of the US Grand Prix last weekend. And as a result, Lando had to ease the steering to the left to give Oscar Piastri room, and then Max, who's on the outside of Lando, had to do the same and went off track. Now, Oscar Piastri did not get a penalty, and we know now because the stewards presumably think first corner very difficult to make any sort of judgment, because everybody's on semi-cold tires anyway, or semi-hot tires, whichever way you want to look at it, and we'll let it go. So they did that in America, and I think they did that because of what happened with Piastri in Hungary. So right at the start of that race, Lando had basically avoided a first corner collision with his teammate, which would have taken out other cars as well, maybe even Max Verstappen, by compromising his own race. And that was another reason why I think he should have been given the win in Hungary, because he did a really, really good job for the team in that first corner. Anyway, Belgian Grand Prix, he ran wide because of, I think, in the back of his mind, what happened in the first corner of Hungary. So if that hadn't happened, and Lando had had a good exit from La Source, as he should have been and entitled to have, I think he would have finished, let's be charitable, he would have second in that race. I'm not sure that Oscar would have beaten him, because he still would have overshot the pit stop as he did. And maybe Lando would have beaten Lewis Hamilton, maybe he wouldn't. I think he probably would have, but okay, let's not be too over the top about this. Let's give him P2 in the Belgian Grand Prix. If Oscar hadn't done what he'd done going into the first corner in Hungary, and indeed if Lando hadn't then given the win to Oscar. Then we go to the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, where, as I say, Lando's on the pole, makes a very good start, cleanly out of the first chicane, job done, into the second chicane, very narrow there, very slippery offline, no way his teammate of all people is going to try to overtake him, and yet he did. There were no team orders, and Oscar did, and he got the lead. And effectively, he should have then won the race. But because Lando was then down to P3 behind Charles Leclerc, the race became, in Lando's mind, obviously he wanted to beat the Ferrari, but he had to beat Oscar Piastri because his win had been taken away, if you like, in that second chicane move. And because he then raced Oscar hard, both of them overused their tyres, both of them had to come in for a second stop, and Charles Leclerc cruised around to win the race. So had Oscar not done that, had there been stricter team orders, better management from the pit wall, I think Lando Norris would have won the Italian Grand Prix as well. So I'm going to give him a P1 there. Azerbaijan, P2 I'm giving him there, because although he finished a very good P4 having set fastest lap as well, that yellow incident in Q1 happened because McLaren inexplicably brought both their drivers in before about 6 minutes from the end of Q1 in Azerbaijan, when the track is absolutely full of cars. Because, I don't know why, it wasn't even for a new set of tyres. It was just basically regrouping and get them out again. I don't know, make the tyres a bit cooler, do something. They both came in and they both went out literally with 3 minutes to go on a packed track, and neither of them had a time in the bag at that point. Now, they've been running on track with Charles Leclerc. Ferrari didn't bring Charles Leclerc in, even though he too was in trouble. And on that same set of medium tyres, which had done about 7 laps by then, Charles did a time easily quick enough to get into Q2, as then did Oscar Piastri under pressure right at the end of Q1. But Lando got the yellow. And the odds of either getting a yellow or too much traffic were enormous at that point because there were 20 cars on track. There was 1 minute to go, and Lando had to get the lap time. So if you're going to do that to both your cars, the odds of one of them getting caught with a yellow or some drama, very high. So that was a big managerial mistake as well by McLaren. And most of the teams that I've spoken to about that, they've said, oh yeah, well obviously they were putting on a new set of tyres. But they didn't. They were on the same set of used mediums. Why bring them in at the end of Q1 of all periods of qualifying, segments of qualifying? It's when all the cars are on track. You just need to stay out and get the lap in. So had Lando, even if he qualified behind Oscar, let's give Oscar the win in Azerbaijan because he drove really well, but I think he would have been second. It was a very good car, and we know how good Lando is around street circuits as well. I mean, look what he did in Singapore. I think he could have won Azerbaijan, but in order not to be too over the top about this, let's give him second place there. I think he would have beaten Charles Leclerc in the second phase of the race, if not the first. I think he probably would have qualified on the front row, actually. And then we get to the US Grand Prix, and you know my thoughts on that. I think that immediately somebody on the pit wall at McLaren should have said to Lando, give the position back. We can easily get him over the next 4 or 5 laps. We can easily do it, Lando. His tyres are going off. I know yours have gone off a bit, but nothing like as much as Max's. Your tyres are much newer. Plus, you're much quicker. You'll get him on DRS. Don't worry. That's what should have happened. And yeah, slight gamble there, but nothing like the gamble of playing with the minds of the stewards and assuming that he's not going to get a penalty for actually gaining an advantage when he's off track, which is a very, very clear rule in the sporting code. It's one of the few things that isn't covered by grey area. It's absolutely clear. So let's move along to the next graphic now, because you can see there how it's changed in terms of how those 5 races, excluding, of course, the Dutch and the Singapore Grand Prix, which Lando won beautifully. You can see now how many points effectively Lando lost in each of those countries. The Hungarian Grand Prix effectively lost 7 points. He should have won that race. The Belgian Grand Prix, I think he lost 8 points because I think he could have been second in that race, as I say. The Italian Grand Prix at Monza certainly lost 10 points. He should have won that. Baku lost 6 points by that incredible decision in Q1 to bring him in just before the end of Q1 and then send him out again with, time to do 1 lap. And then the US Grand Prix, I think he would have been third if they'd done that, and I think he lost 3 points there. So let's have a look now at what difference that then would make in terms of the championship, the Drivers' Championship battle between Max Verstappen, who's actually leading the championship right now, and Lando. And you can see there in brackets is where Max's points are. He has 354 points right now. And if we followed the sequence of what I just said about Lando's results and we promoted him to those correct results that he should have got, that would have eaten a little bit into Max's lead. Not by much, but his 354 points would have come down to 349. The more significant point, of course, is that Lando's current total of 297 would now be 331. Little bit of a double whammy, as I say, with Max also losing points. So whereas the difference right now is 57 points, had McLaren, in my mind, just done everything logically and worked towards Lando Norris as the one of their 2 drivers most likely to win the Drivers' Championship, in the best shape to do so, and given Oscar a few more rigid restrictions of what he could do, i.e. don't pass into the second chicane at Monza, and yeah, Oscar, in theory, we're going to give you the win in Hungary, but that first corner, Lando really saved the team, so we're going to give the win to him. Things like that. The difference would now be only 18 points between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Now, still, that may not be enough, and Max may still well go on to win the World Championship. But I tell you what, if it was 18 points rather than 57, there'd be a lot more pressure on Red Bull and Max Verstappen right now, and more possibility that Max and or Red Bull might make some sort of strategic mistake in terms of the next few races, wherever they are. 18 points is not a lot. 57, yeah, it's still not home and dry by any means, but it feels a lot better if you're Max Verstappen than 18 points. Now, I can hear some of you already saying, yeah, but what about the constructors? That's why they signed Oscar, because he's such a quick driver. That's why they got rid of Daniel Ricciardo. And yeah, no doubt he's quicker than Daniel Ricciardo. No doubt he is an extremely quick and very fast racing driver. And we know he's potentially going to win a world championship probably in the middle distance before not too long. Very, very quick racing driver. But has the way McLaren have run these 5 races actually helped them in terms of the Constructors' Championship? And remember, going back to Hungary, that the pleading to Lando Norris was, Lando, if you really want the team behind us, you've got to do this. You know, it's best for the team in terms of the constructors. Go for it. Let's have a look now at actually what would have happened if we'd followed those, if those results for Lando had worked out as I say, and how it would have affected Oscar Piastri's races, and what would be the situation with the Constructors' Championship right now. Okay, Oscar Piastri would be 10 points fewer over those 5 races than he is now. Lando Norris, however, would be 34 points ahead than he is now. And the Constructors, therefore, it's currently 544 for McLaren. But if they had done a system which had focused on Lando Norris being their key driver for the Drivers' Championship, and it's not that difficult. We're talking about things on the pit wall here. We're not talking about things on the track, apart from the first corner at Spa, which, as I say, I think was engendered by what happened in the first corner in Hungary. Right now, McLaren would have had 568 points in the Constructors' Championship. They'd have more points if they'd been, in quote-unquote, favouring Lando Norris or holding back Oscar a little bit. So there you go. To me, you know, there's a lot of talk always about having the 2 best drivers you can get. It's best for the constructors, and Lando's a good guy playing a waiting game, whatever he's doing, or he did the right thing in Hungary and it'll come back in spades to help him as the season progresses. As I said at the time, you cannot play around with World Championship points in Formula One. 1 point, let alone 25 points, is ridiculously difficult to earn. Talk to the Williams team, talk to any team from the midfield backwards, and how difficult it is to score even 1 championship point. And yet, here at McLaren, in my mind, having thrown away 34 points that Lando Norris could have been earning them without too much change, other than a few decisions made on the pit wall that were logical at the time. Now, there's a lot of, and I think what we're seeing at McLaren is a lot of, I dare say, committee-made decision. I don't think it's that, but the decisions reek of not wanting to make the wrong decision and therefore going for the best possible average decision because that's the one that isn't going to lead us into too much trouble. As distinct from the sort of Patrick Head, Jonathan Wheatley, Freddie Vasseur, right, this is the way it's going to be. I may be wrong, but I'm going to commit to it, which is what I think Vasseur, for example, in the situation McLaren found themselves at the weekend with US Grand Prix and Lando Norris. I think Vasseur would have said immediately, if that had been Charles Leclerc, drop back, repass him in the next lap, next 2 laps, you can do it. Instead of which, there was this sort of soft option of, well, you know, maybe, and nobody took a decision, it seems. It's just like, oh yeah, we'll jump on the radio and tell him to keep going. And that's been typical of these 5 races, in my view, and that's cost them 34 points. They just need a strong person on the pit wall making decisions that with a clear view of where they're going. If you're going to have 2 ultra-quick drivers in the same team in a very quick car, you've got to be very, very careful how you manage them and in terms of how you're scoring the points. And if you want to go back as far as Michael Schumacher, you can say, oh, Michael was terrible for Formula One because he always wanted team orders. He always wanted Rubens or Eddie Irvine or Felipe Massa to finish behind him. Michael was no idiot. He knew what he was doing. He knew that any teammate in a quick car is always going to have his day, is always going to be a couple of races where he's potentially going to take points from Michael Schumacher. And Michael knew the value of World Championship points. He knew the value of 1 point in the Drivers' Championship. And he made it very clear, if you want me to win Drivers' Championships for Ferrari and therefore to help you with the Constructors' Championship, I want every possible angle of maximizing my ability to score points in every Grand Prix. And that's why he did that. And I respect him for that, because at least he did what he believed was right and he got on with it. And here we've got this McLaren thing of, well, you know, let's look after Oscar, let's look after Lando, and, you know, it's all going to be okay. And it's all very wishy-washy. If you put it alongside the way Michael Schumacher, Jean Todt, and Ross Brawn ran the Ferrari team in those golden years. And it's not the only example of that. There are plenty of others as well. There are plenty of other examples of teams getting it wrong the way McLaren have. Williams in 81, very good example. Alan Jones, Carlos Reutemann. Anyway, these numbers, I think, say it all. And right now, as I say, Max Verstappen and Red Bull would be under a lot more pressure had McLaren been stronger on the pit wall with more decisive management and focused on Lando maximizing his ability to score points. Anyway, we'll see what happens. It could well be that Lando may still be world champion, in which case it'd be the most amazing feat of all time to win it, despite this loss of 34. And who knows, there might still be other decisions coming up in the next, 5 races. But there you go. Let's see what happens in Mexico.